Good evening and welcome. I'm Paul Amos, founder of The Redeemed. The Redeemed is an organization or community of men who've come together to celebrate life's triumphs over its difficulties. Today, we're very blessed. We have not only a special guest, but our first repeat guest and our first guest on the show, Jeff Struecker, a war hero, a chaplain, an Army Ranger, and a pastor. And Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. I hope to get it right this time since the first one was, kind of everything was new.
Well, this is, first of all, you did a fabulous job the first time.
Thank you.
And we are thrilled to have you back. But this is special for us because while we've done thematic stuff every month, we wanted to do something special for July 4th.
Of course, yeah.
And we wanted to really talk about patriotism and faith. And so having someone who bridges that gap as well as you do, I couldn't think of anybody better. So thank you for coming and doing it.
Sure, of course.
All right, well, let's start with a couple of quick fire questions.
Yeah, throw me the softballs first before the hard balls.
All right, let's do that. What book are you reading right now?
I just got done with Horst Schulze's book, How Excellence Wins. That book really, really impressed me, really surprised me. Our family's getting ready to take a short trip overseas, and I'm studying the families, some of the founding families of the Italian dynasties, so the Borgias and the Medici families. And wow, those folks were powerful, but those families were just as jacked up as our families today.
It's interesting to see that, and it's kind of relieving to see that despite history.
Yep.
You know, history sometimes erases some of the bad things and holds on to the good things. I was fortunate enough to get to go to Florence with my son last summer, and studying the Medici family was amazing. And being there, what a spectacular opportunity for you. What is your favorite food?
Pizza. I like it. I take it nice and easy, and I'm not a pizza connoisseur. I'm not a foodie to begin with. So I eat food to make the machine run. And I try to put stuff in there that's healthy. But if I get a chance and I'm just, grabbing something, I'll grab a slice of pizza.
What is your favorite hobby?
Running and reading. And if I could figure out a way, I don't listen to anything when I'm running. If I could figure out a way to read and run at the same time, I would do them both at the same time.
I have seen some very brave souls in the gym trying to read a book while running on the treadmill.
That's crazy right there to me.
I just know that I would have no teeth.
I would not only that, but I would get nauseous and throw up all over the book trying to focus on a print on the book while I'm bouncing up and down on a treadmill.
And favorite thing to do with your kids?
I love to just hang out, watch movies, and we also like to hike. Our children are grown now. Youngest just graduated from college. But when they were younger, we loved to go up to Pine Mountain Trail, go to the Appalachian Trail, and now Standing Boy Trail here in our town, and just spend some time on the trail together.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into it.
All right.
And love to start by talking about what motivated you to join the military.
Yeah, like a lot of guys, I was getting in some trouble in high school, and I didn't have a future. A couple of other things were going on in my last year of high school, and nobody was pushing me towards the Army, I guess, or towards the military. I guess I should say that. I was in a really small town. My family comes from a very small town in the Midwest, and in the town where my family comes from, if you don't own a farm, you don't have a future. I didn't have a farm. I was working at a restaurant, a Burger King restaurant, and they started to promote me. And I got scared because the last couple of months of high school, the regional manager of the Burger King said, look, you're doing better than we expected. We want you to go manage your own restaurant right after you graduate from high school.
Wow.
True story. And I remember thinking to myself, 18 years old, just turned 18, still a senior in high school, about to graduate. And I thought to myself, I don't want to be a fast food guy for the rest of my life. And that was the thing that caused me to say, well, I guess I'm going to go talk to an Army recruiter because that's about the only way out of my hometown.
Wow. I wasn't thinking in any way about the military at age 18. I was thinking about all the wrong things. So I'm thrilled to hear that your story wasn't as passionately focused as
Neither was I. I was running away. That's what I was doing. When I went to the recruiter's office, I was running away from a whole lot of stuff.
So you joined the military. And just like at Burger King, your success must have been tremendous because to end up in the Army Rangers, have to have a level of eliteness and success. Tell me about that
Sure.
journey.
I'll tell you, the first few months, maybe the first year or two, I was miserable and I hated it. And I thought I made a big mistake. So I wanted to challenge myself. And while I was in the Army recruiter's office, I was totally ignorant. I don't come from a military family, so I don't even know what I'm asking for in the recruiter's office when I say, what's the toughest job in the Army? And instead of trying to sell me on, something glamorous, the recruiters are basically like, listen, kid, you're probably not tough enough to even consider this. But if you really are thinking about it, you really want to know, go become an Army Ranger right here at Fort Benning, now called Fort Moore, Georgia. And I didn't have the first clue what they were talking about. So I did a little research, came back and said, okay, I want to become an Army Ranger. Can I get that in my contract? And they're like, no, we'll send you to Georgia. We'll train you to be an infantryman. We'll send you to airborne school. And then you can volunteer. And what happens after that is all up to you and whether or not you can actually make it. So my first couple of months in the Army were miserable. I make it through the infantry training, through airborne training. I go through the Ranger assessment and selection program and make it to the unit, and it got far worse. And the first few months, first year or so in the unit, I was asking myself, what on earth did I do? Why did I do this to myself? This was a mistake. And then there was a moment, I remember it very vividly, about a year and a half into my career in the Army, where I started to get the opportunity to lead, and I started to love it. And it was a night and day shift. I went from hating it to thinking, I love this. I think I want to do this for the rest of my life. And it all happened when my role started to shift and I started to be able to lead other Rangers.
That's incredible. So tell me, if you were to think back on your favorite experience, the best experience about being a leader in the Rangers, what would you look back on as the most positive thing and the best thing from that?
Hands down, best thing about serving in the military in general, so this is absolutely true of special operations and Army Rangers, are the people. And there were days where I remember showing up to work, looking at the guys that I worked with and thinking to myself, any one of these guys, no exaggeration, could run a Fortune 500 company. They're that good.
Wow.
And they're all in the same room at the same time. There were some times where I was like, I have to bench myself that I get to work with these guys. And I'm not sure that I have what it takes to keep up with these guys, but I'm going to show up today and I'm going to give it everything that I've got because I don't want to let these guys down. And not a lot of people can say this, but for my entire career in the Army, I felt like that every day. I pinched myself thinking, I can't believe I get to work with people like this.
Wow. Very few of us get that experience. I will say that throughout my career, I've been blessed to work with incredible people. Yeah. I've also been blessed to work with people who were less enthusiastic about their role in their job. You have to kind of deal with the gamut of all thoughts. But it's interesting to see that you were in such a blessed environment and that you see that from such a positive perspective.
Well, here's a quick explanation, though. Of my 23 years in the Army, I spent almost all of it with the Rangers. And the Rangers there's only one or two units, literally, in the military that have what is referred to as summary release authority. The unit has the ability to let anybody go any day for any reason if you can't keep up. And it's not you're fired because you're a bad person. It's just that the unit needs more than you're able to deliver. And if you can't keep delivering what we need from you, then we're going to help you find another job that's a little bit easier on the body or easier on your family. But this unit never slows down. As a result of that, tons of my good friends left the unit because there was a point in their career where they just couldn't keep up anymore. What that also did is created an environment where every guy in the room was a rock star. Wow. And everybody knew every other guy in the room was a rock star. And if you're going to hang out with rock stars, you better be able to be a rock star yourself.
NFL of the military.
Yeah, that's right.
That's awesome. All right. So also discussing the hard stuff. What's the hardest part about being a leader in the Rangers?
Yeah, well, I just said this to a young soldier yesterday, literally yesterday morning in church here in town. The toughest job in the Army, hands down, is being a private in the U.S. Army Ranger Regiment. The pressure, the demands, the responsibilities, the amount of authority, but also the amount of responsibility that goes along with it, the physical demands, I mean, the emotional toll, even psychologically and spiritually, it will test you every day nonstop. And the attrition rate is over 200% for the skill level one, the privates and the initial entry guys in that unit, because it's so brutal. And that doesn't stop basically until you meet a couple of gates, you pass a couple of criteria, and you move into a leadership role. And I've said this for more than 25 years. That hands down is the toughest job in the military. If you can do that, you can handle any other job.
So you are an Army Ranger leader. I can imagine that the idea and concept of patriotism is something that bled through you. But how do you feel emotionally along that roller coaster?
Yeah.
And does it rise and fall? Does it feel pretty consistent?
Yeah, well, it does. To answer your question, I tried not to ever let politics influence my views of the nation. To this day, I've never had a political party. I'm not registered with any party. I've always voted my conscience. Some politicians, some presidents, and some Congress, depending on where they are personally and their foreign policy, some of them treat the U.S. military much better than others do. Let me tell you how old I am. I joined the Army serving under Ronald Reagan. No one loved the military. No one championed the military more, literally, than Ronald Reagan, because Reagan's plan was, I'm going to defeat communism, and I'm going to do it through the best military on the world. And by the way, I'm going to outspend Boris Yeltsin and Mikhail Gorbachev. No one else will be able to keep up with us, defense spending, but also with our military. And Reagan really showed it. Presidents come, presidents go. I went to war with every president from his successor, George Bush Sr., to Barack Obama. And there are some good, some bad. Congress has a play in this. But a lot of it has to do with the U.S. foreign policy and the way that they view, the way that we position America as a nation, not America's military, but what we're telling the world America stands for. Some leaders, it was a distinct honor to serve with them because of the way that they demonstrated to the world what our country stands for, and others, honestly, not so great.
There seems to be, not to get into a political discussion, but there does seem to be a whole lot of shifting back and forth in recent years around what the position of America's military is. I had the most fascinating conversation the other day with a gentleman from Pakistan about his belief and feeling about us as a country. And surprising to me, as a military power, he saw us as a friend, despite very different things, where he saw the Chinese and certain other countries as not so much that way. You know, you try to stay completely out of politics when you're in the military, but emotionally you must feel a tug when you realize there's support versus lack of support.
Yeah, and I don't. You're absolutely right, but that's not the support for me. It's not It's not supporting my family. Obviously, I need to know that I'm going to get the best training and equipment. If we're going to win America's next war, I need to know that my family's going to be taken care of. But honestly, many of America's servicemen and women, Marines, sailors, airmen, soldiers, even the Coast Guard and the Space Force, their primary concern is, what are you saying to the rest of the world about us?
Interesting.
What does the rest of the world believe about this country that we represent? Because we are, in some cases, the only American that they'll ever see. And they'll see us when we put a demolition charge on the door, or when we're killing bad guys to their left or to their right. So foreign policy is often more important than defense spending. It was, at least for my career.
So one of the things that makes you such a unique guest is not just the fact that you have been incredibly successful as a ranger, incredibly successful as a leader, but that your faith has played such a big role in your life. Talk for a minute about, your faith and how that interacted with your role in the military.
I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell this story, but I had a rock solid faith in Christ since I was 13 years old. So when I showed up in the Army recruiter's office at 18, there was no question about where I was going to spend eternity. I was set in my faith. But unfortunately, when I joined the Army, for the first year or two, I didn't show it and I didn't say it. I didn't talk about my faith. I really just stuffed it down. Now, I practiced my faith regularly. I was in church every Sunday. I was reading the scriptures and I was praying daily, but I just wasn't talking to anybody about it. And then at about the 2-year mark, I was living in the barracks because I was still single and a sergeant. And my buddy who was in the barracks with me, who was as pagan and far from Jesus as you can possibly get, we all went home on Christmas vacation. And when we came back, Kurt, my buddy, was radically different.
Wow.
And Jesus reached down and radically saved Kurt on that Christmas vacation. And when Kurt came back, Kurt started talking about his faith. Everywhere that Kurt went, all of us, he was talking about his faith and wanted everybody to know how awesome Jesus was. And when Kurt left the room, the rest of the guys were talking bad about him. Bible thumper and religious zealot and what's gotten into this guy. And every moment that they were talking bad about Kurt, I was feeling less and less worthy as a Christian. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore. And I was like, guys, look, I share his faith. I'm a Christian too. And they were shocked by my statement. And that it is because of my buddy Kurt Smith's boldness with the gospel that I got convicted about not showing my faith. And I kind of made a decision after that, like, no matter what people say about me, I'm going to wear it on my sleeve so that everybody who knows me knows it's just part of who Jeff is. You take that with every other part of him.
That takes boldness.
If it wasn't for Kurt, I don't know that I would be that bold with my faith. And I got mad respect for Kurt.
Well, what an awesome person to see and a motivating transformation to have in front of you. But to hold it from age 13 and on, you clearly have grown up with Christ in your heart.
Yeah.
At some point during your military experience, you decided to lay down the gun and pick up the Bible. Talk about the transition to becoming a chaplain and what it was like to lead from God's word instead of from the traditional perspective.
Yeah, that for me was a bit of a wrestle. In fact, when I talk to guys about ministry now, I don't know that I've ever met one of them that didn't describe it a little bit like struggling with this, wrestling with this, trying to figure this out. So I struggled for a little bit. I was a sergeant in the Ranger Regiment and very, very successful, and I loved it. In fact, I went to work many days, and I would show up at the first formation, 6 o'clock in the morning while it's still dark, got my clothes on, ready to work out in this massive formation of 300 guys. And I remember saying to them, I know exactly why God put me on planet Earth. He wanted me to be a Ranger Sergeant and to prepare you guys for America's next war. He put me on Earth to train Rangers and to win, to defeat our enemies and to win America's wars. And I was convinced that's what I was going to do for the rest of my life and just do it with a very solid faith. And then there was a moment, and it was a very specific moment in time where I could not deny. There was no escaping what God wanted me to do next. I knew it. I think I knew it in my heart for a while, but I was struggling with it. And then this was as clear as anything I've ever felt in my life. And I'll just tell you the moment, Paul, it comes immediately after the big firefight in Black Hawk Down. So I'm out there By the way, Somalia is not my first combat tour, so I didn't get shot. I didn't get scared at. I didn't get religion while I was in the foxhole. For me, I had this rock solid faith, like tonight is my last night on earth. I know Jesus. I know I'm going to die. I know where I'm going to spend eternity. I got no reason to worry. And I've been shot at before in Panama and Desert Storm. This is not new to me. And then when we make it back into the base the next morning, 18-hour firefight, everything around me is bullet holes and blood and dead bodies. Roughly half of the force is killed or wounded in those 18 hours. The next morning, my buddies are waiting for me. It's literally as soon as I get back to the base and get off the Humvees, they're grabbing me and asking me questions about faith. Questions that they should have been asking an Army chaplain. And I'm just a sergeant in the Ranger Regiment, but they're asking me. And they're asking me questions because they're saying, Jeff, I watched it in the city streets last night. Like I heard it over the radio. You were totally calm when everybody else was completely freaking out. And we have the same training. We've been through the same experiences. You obviously have something that I don't have. And whatever that is, I want that. So right now, I need you to tell me right now how I can have that faith that you have. And I started telling my buddies about Jesus. So I'm in an airplane hangar on an airfield in Mogadishu, Somalia. It isn't more than an hour and a half or 2 hours after the firefight is over with. And I have felt this as clearly as anything in my life. I just felt God saying, that's what I want you to do for the rest of your life, Jeff. What you're doing right now, not killing bad guys, but touching the soul of America's warrior. That's what I want you to do with the rest of your life.
I can just imagine that there are two potential outcomes coming out of that 18-hour firefight. One is questioning God, and one is absolutely following God. Did you ever have that moment where you see half your regiment, half the group down and either dead or injured, and that you say, God, why?
I didn't personally ask that question, but everybody who stopped me asked that question, and I didn't have answers for it. And I felt a little bit inadequate. You're asking me really hard theological questions, and I'm just a sergeant in the Ranger Regiment. I don't have the answers to these questions. And I told them, I don't know the answer to this question. But I also didn't personally struggle with the why question. Like the guy right next to me died and I walked away without a scratch. And to this day, it doesn't make any sense. He wasn't better or worse than me. I wasn't better than him. He dies. I walk away. I have no explanation for that except, and this is what I tried to tell my buddies, God is ultimately in charge here. He decides who lives. He decides who dies. I go out into the fight. I give it my best. If I walk away, it's in God's hands. And if I don't walk away, that's in God's hands. And I can't explain why did one guy die and another guy survive. To this day, I can't explain that. And I have a PhD in theology and I still don't know the answers to that.
Well, that is really, really comforting to know that in the midst of those things, that you had the faith and the strength and the compassion and the love and the conviction to do those things and to step forward the way you did.
Yeah. Well, to the guys of the Redeem, I want to say to them, if you're saying, I don't understand, God, why are you letting this bad thing happen to me? Did I do something wrong? Are you mad at me? Don't think about it in those terms. Like, I don't think you should ask those questions. There are no answers for. Maybe we get an answer. I don't know. Maybe we get an answer to that question when we get to heaven. But I do know this. For the child of God, for the man who Jesus has radically changed, those bad things are not happening to you because he's mad at you or because he's playing games with you or he's punishing you. Often those are there to grow you in ways that nothing else could possibly grow you. And almost every guy who survived Somalia has since come to faith. Many of them, it's taken years. But every single one of us have said, I shouldn't be alive right now. And it must be because of God that I survived this thing. There's no other logical explanation for it.
when we started the dream of the redeemed, part of my entire thought behind the name was that I was shocked to read and to understand and learn that we were already redeemed before we
that's
asked
right.
for it.
Yeah.
That God had already taken that path and laid it out for us. He had washed away our sins. He had made us clean. He'd brought us back to be redeemed. And so I'm curious from your perspective, as seeing these other men come to Christ, how did that then bubble and spread?
Yeah. Man, it is so beautiful what the Lord has done since Somalia in the lives of the guys that survived. There are more than a few that have become pastors. There are a couple of guys that have become missionaries. One of the my favorite stories to tell is one of those guys who was a private on the battlefield with us in Somalia became a missionary and will trek into the mountains, into the Himalayan mountain range in Pakistan and India and Nepal and Tibet, and he'll go to villages that have never seen another foreign face. It'll take him months to get in there, and he'll talk to them about the God who created these mountains, and the same God loves you, knows you, loves you, and wants to have a relationship with you. And this guy will go for months, literally walking in and walking out, just so that he can tell somebody who's never heard about Jesus what Jesus has done for them.
Okay, I feel a little inadequate hearing that story, but we're all called to what God's purpose is and to be a part of his perfect plan. And for even those people who are out there who say they're not doing anything at this point, the reality is that it's one little step at a time.
Yeah. And you live out your faith a little bit different than your neighbor, and people notice. They'll take notice.
That's interesting. So you are in a place where I believe patriotism and faith can be alive.
Yeah.
But talk about that interconnection. What do you see as the way that those two things come together?
Sure. There are three famous questions that I've been asked over the years when I do a public talk or just by warriors in the military. And number one, by a landslide, is about faith and serving in the military. And it usually goes like this: is it okay for a Christian to kill? I think what they're really asking is bigger than that, though. I think they're asking, is God okay with what I'm doing for a living? Is it okay to have faith and serve in the military, or have faith and love your country and want to honor your country at the same time? And my answer is one word: yes. Next question. And then they're like, no, I need more information than that. I'm like, listen, keep in mind who you're talking to. I'm the guy who signed up for the Army while I was a Christian, who wanted the special operations, wanted to become an Army Ranger, and expected to go to war, and did it as an enlisted guy for many years before becoming a chaplain. So obviously, I don't personally have a problem with serving in the military and having a solid faith. In fact, I think it's a good thing, if I could be honest with you, Paul, for not just the individual. It's good for the unit, and it's good for the country. It's good for the unit because if that unit ever gets in a place where we're not sure we're going to win this fight, and a lot of people may die tonight, the one guy or gal on the battlefield that should be more courageous than anybody else out there is the one who knows exactly where they're going to spend eternity. That guy or gal should be able to do something on the battlefield that the atheist or the pagan can't do because they're not sure about life after death. But it's actually good for the country because a solid faith system, I'm just going to call it Christian values, they help you conduct yourself on the battlefield and in foreign countries in a way that not just honors your country, but you also know, and I carried this with me every day that I wore the uniform for almost 23 years. I will ultimately answer not to the people of the United States, not to the president of the United States. I'm going to have to answer to God, and he sees everything. So I'm not going to bend the rules. I'm not going to play games. I'm not going to violate the law of warfare or the rules of engagement, not because of my country's sake, but because I'm going to have to answer to God for that if I do. And those warriors those are the last people on earth that would ever commit atrocities, would ever do something to harm the reputation of the country. So I'll go to my grave believing the greatest warriors on the planet should be Christians, because you already know where you're going to spend eternity, and you have the Holy Spirit of the living God directing you what's the right thing to do in really complex, very challenging circumstances on the battlefield.
That's so inspiring. Thank you for sharing that. It means the world to know that there are people out there who have that combination of patriotism and faith and who are living it out. I'd never really thought about the fact that those of us who have a belief in where we're going should give us the most courage to do the greatest things on God's behalf.
Yeah.
That's one I'm going to have to think on, and that's one I appreciate you bringing up.
Well, thank you.
So almost 23 years later, you make a decision, or God leads you to a decision that it's time to move on. Tell me about that, and what was life like coming out of such a big part of your identity?
I think probably that two of the biggest personal struggles of my life was transitioning from an enlisted soldier in the Army, because I absolutely loved it, to being an Army chaplain. I did the last 10 years as a chaplain. And that was a bit of a struggle for me, just because I knew how to conduct myself with the rifle in my hands in front of the enemy. I had to relearn everything about how to handle myself on the battlefield of Iraq and Afghanistan with a Bible and my men instead of the enemy. But it was even more significant, and I didn't know this at the time, Paul. I struggled even more after taking the uniform off and leaving the military. I thought it was going to be seamless. I was like, it'll be easy, no big deal. I know in my heart that it's time for me to move on. God is making it very clear what I'm supposed to do next. And I literally left the Army on a Sunday, and the next day on Monday started on staff at a church here in town. And I just thought that this would be a seamless, easy transition. But I realized it has been a struggle, a little bit of a struggle or a lot of struggle every day. And I've been retired from the Army for 10 years now. And if you really were to ask, like, where is the greatest struggle? It's the people that I had a chance to work with in the Army. I finally realized you'll never find that anywhere else. There's no other room on the planet where that kind of talent is all in one room at one time. And I miss that.
I can imagine there is so much you miss from the military, from the structure to the faith to everything you did. And so let me just take a moment and say thank you for your service.
Well, man, it was an honor to do it. I'd do it all over again.
So you step out into a role of being a pastor in a world where it's secular and different, but you're still in the world of faith. How well did you transition to being a pastor?
Yeah.
And then at some point I want to talk about the fact that you not only led, but then you now opened your own church.
Yeah.
So you've gone down the journey of
Right.
this path while simultaneously dealing with this separation from the military.
I think the people of the church, the people that I have the privilege of pastoring, they can probably answer the question much better than I can. How well did Jeff do adjusting? I think for me, it's still a work in progress, and I'm happy that it's still a work in progress. Because I did almost my whole Army career. I started my career, did a very long stint here in this town, and then I came back and wrapped up my career for a very long stint here, and we stayed here, my wife and I. And I've been in this community for more than 30 years now, and I've been around the military of this community for more than 30 years. And I will tell you this. The guys and gals that are currently in uniform are every bit as talented, maybe more talented than the guys and gals that I served with 30 years ago. But it's also a bit like being around an old girlfriend who's really, really good looking sometimes, and you see her every day, all day long, and you're reminded of what you used to have while you're in uniform. I just know deep in my soul, God has called me to do what I'm doing now, and I'm not going to look back. But I also have the chance to do it around the guys and gals that are still my heroes. So I think I really do have the best of both worlds, but I feel tugged, to spend a little bit more time with the military than maybe I should, or I spend time with the church, and I feel like I really wish I was spending a little bit more time with the military today. So every day, that's a bit of a tug for me.
Well, I would think you also have the opportunity to bridge that gap, because I would think that there's a large cross section of people in the military who come to your church.
Yeah. The church is almost entirely military. That's not on purpose. We didn't do anything to get to that level. It's just the military found me. They learned about me, and they showed up and they stayed. And I'm really, really involved in what's happening to this day out on Fort Moore. So I'll be out there tomorrow morning, early in the morning, for a ceremony out there. And I consider it a privilege to stay involved. That's one of the reasons why we stayed in this community, is so that we could stay connected to the military for the rest of our lives.
You've said Fort Moore 2 or 3 times now.
Yeah.
You say it with such ease.
It's an adjustment. I'm forcing myself every time I say it to don't use the word Benning, say Moore. But let's be honest, Hal and Julia Moore deserve that honor.
That's
they really
awesome.
do.
What a great story that is behind
They
that.
deserve that honor.
So if we can, let's talk about your favorite 4th of July memory.
Sure. I have a couple of them. And I'll just say this to the guys that are listening right now. I'm not ashamed at all to say this. I get emotional a couple of times a year. Memorial Day, I get very emotional because I always think about one or two of my buddies. And more than that, I think about their families who they're not here, and children grew up without a dad. Wife didn't have her husband with her anymore. And Memorial Day is very emotional to me. For me, the 4th of July is very emotional. And it doesn't matter where I'm at. When the fireworks go off, I get very, very emotional about that. Because I think all the way back, and this is not, I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I think all the way back to 1776 and what those guys were setting out to do. We believe that if we were to give a society a chance at freedom that no human being on earth has ever had, if God will preserve and protect us, and we give people that kind of freedom, maybe something beautiful will happen. If you watch the news about immigration and the migrant caravans that are coming in the tens or hundreds of thousands and trying to get into the country illegally, I think you have to stop and ask, why would they take such risks to get here? Mm-hmm. What is it? Not what are they fleeing from? What are they fleeing to? What does America represent to them? And I get really emotional when the fireworks go off because I'm thinking about buddies that died on battlefields, but I'm also thinking about what the founding fathers set out to accomplish. And deep in my bones, I want America to continue to represent that to the rest of the world. That's why tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people will put their life and their fortunes and their families at risk just to try to get into this country because of what it represents.
I will have a different perspective on fireworks come this July 4th, thanks to you. That is a beautiful description, and I think something that can inspire us all. You know, going back to your youth, you know, what influenced you as a future leader of our nation? I mean, what may help shape your idea of leadership?
Yeah. I was heavily influenced by looking for and longing for something that I couldn't find. So this part of my story, I'll be really brief with it. My mom and dad divorced when I was very young. I lived with my mother. She went through multiple other marriages and divorces, but we moved, no exaggeration, more than 20 times before finishing high school.
Wow.
I moved sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, went to 4 high schools in 3 states. And I was trying to figure out 2 things. What does it mean to be a man? No, there were no men in my life, literally no men in my life. So I didn't have the first idea what it meant to be a man. And that's why I want to applaud you and the Redeemed for what this podcast stands for. But I was also struggling with what is family supposed to look like? And I married my high school sweetheart a couple of years into serving in the Army, and we started having children, and I realized I am totally unprepared to have a family, to be a father. I don't even know what it means to be a man. And it set me on a long journey to try to understand manhood and the responsibilities of being a father and a husband and being a leader in the home. And I've studied leadership at all levels for I've studied it for decades. And I'll just say this, without a doubt, hands down, the toughest leadership assignment I have ever had, the toughest leadership assignment I think any man will ever have is leading well in the home. Because you just can't fool your wife. You can't fool your kids. I mean, it is day in, day out, and they're going to see you at your worst. And you can say with your mouth one thing, but they know deep inside what really makes you tick. And I wish I could say I led in the home really well every day, but I know I didn't. There's a lot that I could have done to be a better husband and a better dad. But for me, there was a strong desire to do the best I could because I just didn't know what I was doing. And I was figuring it out as I went along, but I didn't want to leave my sons or daughters to try to figure it out. I wanted to leave them a solid example.
I think for so many men, especially those who are burdened with shame, the ability to lead in the home is greatly hampered.
Yeah.
I think the enemy is constantly under attack.
Definitely.
And spiritual warfare that exists out there today is something that I think few people recognize, but is such a powerful influence. Talk about stepping forward as a father.
Yeah, sure. I want to talk to that guy who's made some big mistakes and he is ashamed and embarrassed and haunted by those mistakes. You are nowhere different from where I was, brand newly married, got a baby on the way, and haven't the first idea how to be a father, how to be a husband. And instead of running from my past, instead of running from my mistakes, I decided I'm going to use this to help push me in the right direction. So I'm talking to that guy right now who's really ashamed, who really is hampered by your past, haunted by your past. Don't let the enemy convince you you're not worthy, you're not good enough. In fact, why don't you use those mistakes in the past as motivation to make sure that I never do anything like that again? My goal was, I don't know how to be a dad, so I'm going to go out there and try to figure it out. And I don't even know where to start, but I'm just going to start asking questions and see where it leads. I don't know how to be a good husband because I literally have never seen it, but I'm going to try to figure it out as I go along. And the same doubts are in the back of my head. You don't know how to be a husband, Jeff. You're going to mess this up, as a guy who's made a mistake and haunted by those mistakes. But the mistakes don't have to stay with you. And by the way, can we just remind ourselves that for those of us that are in Christ, yeah, you made some mistakes, and so did I, some really big mistakes, but there's no condemnation. That God has, in Christ, paid for those mistakes. And if God is not holding those mistakes over your head, why are you holding them over your head?
Wow. I'm a big fan of John Eldredge.
So am I.
And he talks about one of the most powerful questions that men are asking is, do I have what it takes?
Am I worthy?
Am I worthy?
Mm-hmm.
That at the heart of a man is something that he's looking to understand. It sounds like that's the journey that you went on. And perhaps you could tell us, was it God and a sonship that helped you answer that question?
Yeah.
Who stepped forward for you?
Well, I want to big shout out to John Eldredge. I probably gave away 10,000 copies of Wild at Heart when it first came out. I was going back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was taking that book by the case and handing it out to guys on mountainsides in Iraq or in Afghanistan. Here, read this book, or in a dusty street in Iraq. Read this book. This book is good for you. You're going to like this book. I didn't have an example to look to. And so I kind of stumbled my way through it for a long time. And I learned, well, I don't want to do what that guy's doing. I think I want to pick a little bit of what this guy's doing, but there's still some stuff that I'm not sure what it looks like. And Paul, there was a moment in the grace of God that I realized I am never going to be the kind of father these children need. I'm never going to be the kind of husband that my wife needs if I try to model myself after another man. Learn from other men. Don't repeat their mistakes, kind of follow the things that they're doing well. But there was a moment where God made it pretty clear to me, if you want to find the best father in history and follow him, that's me. So you just try to lead like I lead, Jeff, and everything else will take care of itself. Literally, my first trip over to Afghanistan, I'm now been in the Army for almost 20 years, 15, 20 years, and I've got 5 children at home, and I'm really, really stressed out about what happens to my children if I don't survive. My wife is beautiful. She's young. She'll find another guy. She'll get married. She'll be fine. But my children will have to grow up without a dad. And I struggled getting on the airplane on that first trip over to Afghanistan. Like, God, if I don't come back, what happens to these children? Yeah. And I'm on the airplane flying over to Afghanistan, really, really wrestling with this. And there was a moment where I just felt the Holy Spirit remind me, like, Jeff, if you don't make it back, and I'm not promising you that you will, I will become a father to your children. And by the way, Jeff, I will be a much better father than you can, so you got nothing to worry about. Just go over there and do your job and don't worry about it. And that was an enormous relief, enormous weight off of my shoulders when I realized the King of the universe can be a much better father to these children than I can. And I spent most of those last 10 years in the Army overseas and not with them. And I did my best to stay connected and to love them and to lead them from 13,000 miles away. But I also was on my face every day begging God to be the father in the home tonight that I can't be because I'm halfway around the world in a combat zone.
You know, I think about my 4 and your 5 kids. Mm-hmm. And the greatest gift that we can give them is their salvation, and the leadership toward that salvation. How do you and how did you influence them toward God and away from the things that are going to deter them in the wrong direction?
I love your questions, man. You're asking some great questions today. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. There was zero discussion when I grew up in my mother's house or even when I was at my dad's house for a week or 2 in the summer. No one prayed, no one read the Bible, no one talked about Jesus. There was zero faith growing up. And then I tell people, Jesus just reached down and radically changed this 13-year-old boy, and he did it through my next door neighbors. So when I became a father, it scared the living daylights out of me. The most important thing in my life is my faith, but no one has passed their faith on to me, and I don't have the first idea how to pass my faith on to my children, and I'm freaking out about this right now because I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. And I really wrestled with this for a while, and then I finally came to the realization, I can't force another human being on the planet to believe anything. I can't make my children believe in Jesus, but I know what I can do. I can live my faith out in front of them in such a way that they say, I don't know if I believe in Jesus, but I am absolutely 100% convinced my daddy believes that Jesus is real. And if my daddy believes it that much, maybe I ought to start looking into it. And that kind of shifted my focus. From that moment on, my focus was not trying to force my children to believe something, though I think I was trying to do that early on. But live it out in such a way that they're like, no one on the planet can convince me that my daddy doesn't believe this. And maybe I need to give it some thought because my daddy is that convinced. Maybe I should look into it.
I wish I can say I did it the way you did it. I certainly was in my early 40s before I think I started to set the example that you set from the outset.
Well, I messed up quite a bit those first few years because I didn't know what I when I say I stumbled through it, I had no clue what to do. So I just made a lot of mistakes and did a few things right until I came to this point. Didn't mean to interrupt you, of just realizing I can't force them to believe, but I can live in such a way that they are absolutely convinced that I believe it.
Well, your children are blessed to have you. And despite being gone for 10 years, to be on your face every day and to be doing the prayer for them and guiding them and knowing that we all as human fathers are going to leave a father wound that hopefully guides our kids toward their relationship with Jesus and with God. And that is just such a powerful thing to hear you say.
Yeah.
You have, transitioning a little bit, you have knocked the ball out of the park with your podcast.
Oh, man, come on. I took an example from you and tried to shamelessly steal it and use it. Yeah.
Well, y'all are killing it.
Thank you.
And so maybe you can talk for a minute about what do you consistently hear across all the amazing people that you interview? what are some of the themes from them about leadership and about faith?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell your listeners a secret that I don't tell anybody else that listens to my podcast. Our podcast is not listed in any of the Christian categories on purpose. So when we first started this, I was talking to some local media guys here in town, and I said, I want to go after a guy who will never, ever go in the doors of the church because he thinks they've got nothing for me. I don't like those people. I don't feel comfortable around them. The church has nothing for me. And it occurred to me, if they don't go to church, then the church has to go to them. But if I list this as a religious podcast, they're not even going to listen. So I started this podcast in purely secular channels on purpose. And then the idea here is to bring guests on there that have some pretty compelling story and let them do the talking. And then at some point, and I usually tell the guests this ahead of time, I'm going to set the ball on the tee and make it super easy for you. All you got to do is just swing the bat. I'll usually get to a point in the podcast where I will ask them, listen, you went through something that most people would not be able to handle. They would have curled up in a ball. They would have given up. They would have quit, but you didn't. How are you able to keep going when everybody else around you would have quit? And I don't even have to tell the guest what to say next. They immediately start talking about their faith. So to answer your question, Paul, people from every walk of life, business, military, politicians, musicians, sports stars, you name it, they all share the exact same experience. I went through this really traumatic event that should have ruined my life, but actually my life is better. I talked to guys that had 3 strokes by the age of 30, a woman who went through cancer multiple times and open heart surgery while she was still trying to raise a single mother, trying to raise an elementary age child. And every single one of them have made the same statement. I wouldn't trade what happened to me for the world, because it forced me to start to look at the world different and live different. And now my life is much better because of that terrible thing that happened to me a long time ago. In fact, they're leading so well because of the really hard things that they went through. And I really believe the greatest leaders on the planet, they all lead. I'm using a classic quote here. They all lead with a limp. You see, when Jacob was Jacob from the Bible, going back to meet with his brother and thinking to himself, I cheated my brother. I know he's going to be out for blood. He's going to kill me. The night before he met up with his brother Esau, Jacob meets a guy alone by the river and starts to wrestle. And he's wrestling literally with his faith. And at the end of the night, I believe it's Jesus in the flesh touches Jacob in the hip and kind of dislocates Jacob's hip. And for the rest of his life, Jacob is going to lean on his staff and lead with a limp. I also think Jacob leads much different after he walks away from the river than he led before the river. And Jacob is a much better leader because of the hard things and because of the challenges that he went through. He's a better leader because he's leading with a limp. And that's the story I get to tell. That's the story you get to tell. That's the story that all of us have that story. Some of them much more extreme than others, but all of us have that story.
Well, God makes it clear to us that hardships are a part of what's going to get us into heaven.
Yeah, that's right.
Before we wrap this up, I would love for you to give some advice to our audience.
Sure.
Just to say to them, what you've amassed over the years and the love that you have for our country and for your faith and everything else. What advice would you give to our listeners?
Yeah, 2 things. The guy who we've talked about more than once in this episode that's struggling, and you're struggling with your past, and you're really struggling with being haunted by your past. I'm going to just challenge you. Let it go, man. The scriptures say this, that the King of the universe, the God in heaven who sees everything, knows everything, when he looks down at his sons, those that have been bought by the blood of Jesus and adopted into his family, those of us who can call him Father, he doesn't see our sin anymore. In fact, the book of Psalms puts it this way, He casts our sin away as far as the east is from the west, meaning that sin is gone forever. So if God is not holding that sin over your head, I don't want you to personally hold that sin over your head. If you're really struggling with the past, let it go so that you can have the future that the King of the universe wants for you. But for all of the listeners, especially around this 4th of July week, I want to challenge you, not just when you see the fireworks, not when you see the American flag waving. I want to challenge you. God has given you a precious gift. He has given you the ability to live in the freest society in human history. Nothing else is even close. And that society only stays free because we're involved, we're active, we make sure that we don't give our freedom. No enemy will ever come and defeat America and take our freedom away. They won't conquer us on our own soil. What will happen is we will give our freedom away a little bit at a time until there's no freedom left to give. So when you see the fireworks, honor those warriors that gave their life, the founding fathers that pledged their all to give you this freedom, but don't give it away. Freedom is precious. It's priceless. Don't give it away for a little bit of pleasure or a little bit of, something today. Hang on to that freedom and hang on to it for dear life.
What a beautiful challenge. What a beautiful analogy to think about freedom. You fought for our country's freedom. You're now fighting for our freedom and the souls of the men that you're saving in your church and you did as a chaplain, and the example that you set both as a military guy and as a member of your family. Today, we've been honored to have Jeff Struecker with us, a hero and someone who has been a friend to this ministry and helped back us, helped support us, and we're just so thankful for him.
Well, I am a fan of the Redeemed, and I'm behind you guys 100%.
We want to take just a moment to remind you about Restored, the Redeemed Men's event. A very special night of fellowship, faith building, and encouragement taking place this August at the Bibb Mill Event Center in Columbus, Georgia. It will feature a keynote by Heisman Trophy winner Tim Tebow, along with inspirational messages from our ministry team here at the Redeemed. And it's all about helping men find freedom from their personal struggles by discovering the true purpose that God has laid out for them. Tickets are going fast, so go to theredeem.com/restored to get your tickets. The conference is scheduled for 7:30 p.m. on Thursday, August the 24th, and we hope to see you there.